It's been said the key definition of leadership is leaders basically challenge the process. They look at things new and differently. Leaders see things before others see them. Leaders see things further than others see them. Sometimes leaders see it earlier and, if you will, faster than others see them. We've got two world-class leaders here that are really leading change in the Canadian church. And I'm delighted to welcome Tim Day and Carey Nieuwhof to 100 Huntley Street today. Guys, it's good to see you.
Thanks.
Host with us at times and guest with us at times. It's good to see you. We were talking about your years at Meeting Place. You were there for Meeting House. How many years there?
15 years.
15 years. Mm-hmm. And were you there when the initial church plant, when it started? When it was
Actually,
launched?
interesting. Yeah, we're right there at the initial inception. This is going back to 1985.
Right.
But then came back on staff full time 2001 when we were in a high school. Church is busting at the seams, and witnessed over the last 15 years it sort of growing up as a multi-site church in Toronto.
Yeah, it's fabulous. And I guess outside of Toronto as well. There are
That's right. Ottawa,
churches.
Parry Sound, London.
And how many people would be gathered in these multiple sites on a weekend?
Any given Sunday, 5,000, 5,500.
It's phenomenal. Mm-hmm. It's very good. And then Carey, you have been in formation for a number of years and just had a rebrand with Connexus Church.
That's right.
In the Barrie Aurelia area. How is that going? You've just moved into new facilities.
Going well, yeah. We're several months into a brand new permanent facility. For our first 7 years, we were completely portable, which was awesome and challenging at the same time. But now we have a home base, and our Aurelia location we refreshed as a portable church. And so we see about just over 1,000 people now, many weekends, and about 2,400 people call our church home. So about 60% of them didn't previously regularly attend church.
And
so we're very excited.
You have affiliation with North Point Church in our
We
friend
do.
Andy Stanley.
We are the only North Point strategic partner in Canada. And so I teach about half time, and then we use Andy Stanley's messages about the other 50%
Poor Andy
of the time.
he really struggles. It's sad.
Yeah, he really struggles. I try to bail him out.
Pray for him because he can't communicate worth anything. It's just terrible. I've known Andy.
Yeah, you guys are friends. You need to
long time.
preface that.
Long
Absolutely.
time.
He's a great guy.
A couple of books here I want to talk about. Tim, your book is God Interstage Left. Carey, you've got Leading Change Without Losing It, which I thought is a great title. You've got another book called Lasting Impact I want to mention in a moment. You guys really have been involved seeing the Canadian church change. Now, I first came to Canada in 1993 with a high-profile church that was in decline, People's Church in Toronto. Came in there as 35-year-old in a very traditional church situation, evangelical, well-respected, but having some tough times. And I think about where that church is now, and Charles Price, my successor, has done such a fabulous job. But I see 20 years ago how we were pastoring churches and how we were relating to people. It's a different scene now. I could not go to People's and pastor that church today the way I did 20 years ago. How has the landscape changed here?
Yeah.
Tim?
The landscape is always changing, first of all.
That's right.
And so how it's changed is, maybe if I can frame it before I answer the question, I think the most important thing that stands out to me about navigating change is welcoming it. And rather than seeing it as an adversary or something to sort of try to put the brakes on and slow down, rather than say, if you're growing a garden, you want it to change. If you're cutting lawn at a graveyard, there's not much change.
Yeah.
So once you set your emotional tone, this is a good thing. This is an exciting thing. How is God moving? How is culture evolving? Once you set that emotional tone, then you can sort of welcome it. You can engage in it. I'll tell you what the biggest thing that is dawning on cultural change is communications, how people relate.
Yeah.
And previously, Carey and I were just talking about this previously. Previously, everything around communication, how people did community, was within bricked walls. You had to go somewhere, hang out, listen to somebody talk.
An event.
An event. It could be a movie theater, going to class, going to work. You had to get people together to talk. Now people are connected constantly, all the time. What this has allowed is people who haven't previously been able to talk, can communicate, and it can happen at any time. which the main thing around change that I've witnessed is speed of change and creativity.
Yeah, like you said, change has always been with us, but the rate of change now is exponentially faster than it was when I started out in the early 1980s.
And so are you in the conversation? Are you a part of that communication that's happening really 24/7 all the time? Or are you basically just setting up for your event?
Yeah.
And I think the huge thing that we've witnessed at the Meeting House is moving from a mindset of we're about offering a church service once a week so people can gather to hear a message, to start to shift to think, no, we're about an ongoing community that's living life throughout the course of the week, and we're in constant dialogue, asking the question, Jesus, how can you use us? How can you work through us to make a difference in our community?
Now, Tim, you guys launched a new work, and so you're able to have a foundation where you could shape your future without a lot of conflict. But Carey, there are others out there, and you've been in this too, where you were inheriting institutional situations, churches that had been doing church a certain way for a long time. And here comes the opportunity, the reality that if we're going to be relevant to a culture, we're going to have to do some things new and different. Some men and women are inheriting churches that are traditional and slowly dying. You know, some churches, some leaders right now are watching their churches grow the wrong way. You know, reverse growth. That's where you've been in some of your journey. Talk to us about that reality and just coming to grips of what that means, because that's tough.
Well, that's where I started in leadership, and in fact, we're still, 20 years later, have some of the same leaders who are part of it. But I inherited 3 very small, rural, declining mainline churches that really, I mean, declining, they're like 6 people at one, 15 at another, and 25 at a third. And they had been that way for decades. And the writing was on the wall. Like, we knew it was over. I was young, I was just starting out, and so we implemented radical change. In a 5-year window, we changed absolutely everything, from the governance to the music to the style of preaching. We sold our buildings, we moved to an elementary school. And the reason we did radical change was because, I mean, incremental change would have meant we just incrementally died slowly. And so I think with the church, and I agree with Tim, I think we're in that kind of a revolution now. And I think even the successful churches, now we are a relatively successful church. We're reaching a lot of people. But the biggest enemy is the status quo. And I think the next decade could probably prompt even deeper change than we've had to face before.
Tim, it takes a lot of courage to be a pastor in a church where it's slowly declining. You almost get a false sense of what's around you, but it's in decline. It takes a lot of courage to say, hey, we need to make some serious shifts here.
And for a lot of times, it's a risk of reputation. Yep. It's a risk of losing the thing that you're an expert at and becoming somewhat of a novice, a learner again. And once you're in a bit of decline, the tendency is to circle the wagons, fortify. Let's make what we have better. We're not going to change it. Maybe we're just going to do some touch-up paint and try to polish it up. And it takes a lot of courage to hold all of that past success with an open hand before God and say, God, you're always reinventing your church. You're always about doing a new thing. I need to open myself up.
You talk about leading change. How do you go about? What are some steps, early steps, that pastors that are watching this and thinking we're going to have to make some changes? Not just for change's sake, but
right.
What are some early steps they need to take to after going to the Lord? What, humanly speaking, do they need to do next?
I think it starts with vision. You have to have a vision of a preferred future. So you have to imagine. So even now, you could stop at 1,000 people and say, oh, we've done a good job, cruise for another decade. I think that would be a terrible mistake. And so what we're doing, and we've talked about it in the last few months at our church, great, we're reaching all these people. 1 in 15 people who attend church in Central Ontario attend Connexus. Like, those are good numbers. But there are 256,354 people who will not be in church this weekend. That is our mission. It's going to take more than just our church to reach them, but that's our mission. So you have to start with a vision that creates discontent with the status quo. And I think for churches that have had some moderate success or maybe in a holding pattern, the greatest enemy of your future success is your current success. And you have to be comfortable as a leader creating healthy, what Hybels called years ago, holy discontent in your church, to be able to say, well, this is great, but we're not there yet. we're not done because the mission goes on. So I think that's where it starts. And then you rally a team around that discontent and that vision for a future, and you build a coalition. And I think to a certain extent you have to ignore the critics. They're never more than 10%.
But they will be there.
They will be there, and they will be loud.
It'll sound like they're 60%.
They will, because they're loud, and they're the ones who complain. And you just have to focus. You have to choose. Am I going to focus on who we're going to reach or who we're trying to keep?
So Tim, you are transitioning out of the local church, but really moving into a role where I think you can become a pastor to pastors. Is it City Reach? Is that
City Movement?
City Movement. Pardon me. You are engaged will be engaged with major cities across the country.
Yes.
Really, I would think important source of encouragement to pastors in urban areas.
I think, on this issue of change, it's going to be more than pastors, I think. It's going to be leaders within the community, business leaders, board members. Education, all these different facets. Because I think one of the good things we have going for us right now is everybody's aware of the rate of change. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have that conversation. When people look out, they say, this world is changing rapidly. Yeah. Sociologically, communication, global connectedness. It's just in rapid change. And so you can start at that point of the conversation. And what's exciting to me about where the church is at right now is I think that awareness has created an appetite and a new flexibility to say, do you know what, we can risk more. Yeah. We can break down some of those walls and start to work together in new collaborative ways, listening to a new generation and saying, God, what can you do now in our day in a new way? But as you've highlighted, this takes courage. And it also takes sort of a perseverance, because there's going to be failure, there's going to be mistakes. Some things work, some things don't work. And people want this perfect golden, sort of dawning from heaven, the perfect solution. And that's not how it comes. It's messy, it takes work, and it takes
missteps.
I tell people, if you find the perfect church, I think it's true anywhere. If you find the perfect church, don't go there. You'll ruin everything.
You'll ruin it.
Right?
Absolutely.
These guys right here are right at that 50-year-old mark. You don't mind me sharing that.
No,
that's where they are. And you may be as well in your leadership, and you need to make sure that you don't get entrenched, that you're open, and that you are growing, and that you're into personal growth and spiritual growth and development in your life. You need to stretch and move out of your comfort zone while staying in your strength zones. You can do that, and I hope that you will. Guys, thank you. I'm so glad you're on our team, that we're all in this together. Great books. Tim Day, Carey Nieuwhof. Their resources available at our e-store.